Recording in progress.
Members of the Board of Trustees, Subcommittee on Investments, please respond present when you hear your name. Chairperson Thompson.
Present.
Trustee Ferrer. Trustee Wilkins. I thought I saw Sandra.
Yeah, you did.
Yep. Somewhere we lost her.
I let her in.
Okay, we'll come back in. I know, I thought it was her. Trustee Kim. Oh, there's Sandra.
Present.
Professor Verzani.
Present.
Professor Benton.
Present.
Jonathan Hannon.
Present.
And Jasmine Ramirez, the student alternate? Nope. Okay, we have a quorum. This Public Committee on Fiscal Affairs is now called to order pursuant to the New York State Legislature's recent extension of the suspension of required in-person meetings under the Open Meetings Law. This meeting is being held remotely via video conference with access to the public session available on the CUNY Board of Trustees website. A copy of the calendar and agenda of items is also available online at the CUNY Board of Trustees website. Additional items may be added during the meeting. As a reminder, please mute so we can ensure that everyone can hear. We will now take a roll call attendance from members of the Chancellery and other invited guests. Members of the Chancellery, please respond present when you hear your name. Chancellor Matos Rodriguez.
Present.
General Counsel and Senior Vice Chancellor for Legal Affairs, Derek Davis.
Present.
Executive Vice Chancellor and Chief Operating Officer, Hector Batista.
Presente.
Interim Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer, Christina Chiappa.
Present.
Thomas Zhao, the University Executive Treasurer.
Present.
And President Anthony Monroe, excuse me, the COPS Liaison.
Present.
Great. We're also joined today by several guests from Makita Investments, Gianni Jones,
Present.
Judy Chambers.
Present.
Terrific. It's all you, Bill.
Okay, thanks, Gail. Let's now turn to the items requiring a vote today. Given that all board members are participating remotely via Zoom and we're unable to see everyone all at once, I'll announce the resolutions and ask for members to respond only if you'd like to abstain or oppose an item. Otherwise, your vote will be recorded as a yes vote. If you're voting no or abstaining, please state your name and vote. Additionally, if you wish to second an item or have any questions, please state your name first for the record, and let's try to avoid talking over each other. Our action items. Action item 1A is the approval of the minutes of May 3rd, 2021, October 4th, 2021, and January 10th, 2022. I'd like to move these items. May I have a second?
Ferrer seconds.
Is there any discussion on this item? Okay, we'll now vote. Please only respond if you like to abstain or oppose. That item's approved. I'd like to now address section 2, the policy calendar. Policy item 2A is a resolution to approve the fiscal year 2023 CUNY investment portfolio spending rate. This is an annual activity. It's performed each spring and is required to be in compliance with the New York Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. The university is required to analyze the investment portfolio to determine the appropriate spending rate for the upcoming fiscal year. Fiscal year 2023, the university is proposing a 4% spend rate, which is the same rate as fiscal year 2022. Now ask Interim Chief Financial Officer Christina Chiappa to introduce the topic before handing it over to Thomas Zhao, the University Executive Treasurer, for a brief presentation.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. I just want to say, I'm going to turn it over to University Executive Treasurer Tom Zhao, just to do a quick presentation. As the chair mentioned, this is an annual activity that we need to do to determine the correct spending rate for the next fiscal year. So I'm just going to turn it over to Thomas.
Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Good
now.
evening, members of the board and members of the Chancellery. In the context of what Makita just presented a few minutes ago, we have certainly a decision to make tonight. In the next few slides, I'm gonna breeze through this a little bit. We're gonna go over briefly NMIFA, the CUNY funds, the 8 prudence factor, and looking at our peers in the Kumbo, the endowment study for 2021. And lastly, we're going to arrive at the proposed spending rate. NMIFA, obviously, as Chair Thompson mentioned, there are several different aspects to NMIFA, which governs the management and investment of funds. The one item that we're looking at today is item number 2, which governs the appropriation, or in this case, the spending of funds. And what NMIFA basically wants the board and the subcommittee to do is act in good faith and with care with what ordinary prudent person would exercise under similar circumstances, right? So prudence is important. NMIFA asks the board to be prudent in the deliberation of the funds. Next, the CUNY funds. CUNY funds provide vital support for our colleges and our students. There are many funds in the investment pool. However, what NMIFA allows us to do is to group similarly situated funds, for example, funds that are for scholarship, academic support, institutional support, instruction, so that we don't have to necessarily make a decision on every single fund in there, but it allows us to group and make a single decision with respect to the funds. And what is prudence, right? Well, there are 8 prudence factors that is actually outlined in the NMIFA. Let me see. Go in here, actually. So duration and preservation. We want to make sure that the endowment is available indefinitely for future generations. Okay. The purpose of the fund, general economic condition, as Makita mentioned, there's certain uncertainty in the economic conditions. The effect of inflation. Right now, we're looking at 30, 40-year high inflation. However, as Makita mentioned earlier, it looks like inflation is peaking right now, and it is slowly to ebb in the near term. Expected total return, as you saw earlier from Makita's presentation. The CUNY long-term investment pool is looking at long-term. When they looked at 20-year based on projection, the 20-year projection actually is going higher based on what they're seeing in the portfolio. Other resources of the institution, alternative to expenditure of the endowment fund, which, as you know, we have been using federal stimulus money to provide some of the spending, scholarship, emergency funds for our students, and the CUNY investment policy. One of the things I'll highlight about the CUNY investment policy is that our policy does not allow our colleges to carry forward funds that they do not use in the current year, meaning that if they don't use it in any given year, they don't get to carry that for future years to spend. So every year is unique, and every year is separated by itself, is isolated. So the NACUMBO endowment, a couple of things about the endowment study. One, 2021 was a banter year. Most colleges had great returns, gifting increase. And one of the other things that you'll see also is that most endowments, they actually have a 4.54% spending rate in 2021. CUNY had a 4% spending rate, right? We were lower, we were more conservative, and that is important. And more than half the endowments increased their support as well for, between the different areas, between school and operation maintenance, student financial aid. So this is where our peers and how the broader market is with endowments. And how does this compare with CUNY? Well, you have CUNY here, right? Comparing against endowments that are 251 to 500 million. As you can see, a dominant amount, over 50, close to 60% of what CUNY spends in the long-term investment for endowment is on scholarship, is to support our students, our neediest students. Okay, which is also very important why, even in the midst of the current economic condition, why it's important that we provide the support to our students. the spending rate. Now, we have not done this in the past, but let's take a look. In terms of historical returns and spending rate, right? Historically, we have returns and surplus above and beyond where the approved spending rate is. Right? Historically, you see there are blips in 2020, obviously due to the due to COVID-19, the spending was greater than the return. However, over in the long term, which is what the pool is about long term, that's not the trend that we see. The trend that we see historically is that the returns are much higher than the spending, than the pool spending. And furthermore, when we look at what the board approved in terms of the spending and what actually gets on average spent by our colleges, we're seeing also there's a gap. There's a surplus in terms of what is approved and what the colleges are actually spending on average, right? So that also provides some buffer for us. That provides some surplus and some buffer for us as well during downtime, such as 2022. So in terms of evaluating the spending rate, right? Obviously, what I showed you before in terms of the surpluses, historical surpluses coming from income above approved, as well as approved above the actual spending, right? There are historical buildup of funds that allows us to have a very more kind of like flat line in terms of allows us to spend in a more predictable way, right? We know that inflation is a 30 to 40-year high. Economic condition, there's uncertainty in the economics in the short term. In the long term, we're seeing certainly more stability and definitely increases in terms of returns as well, as Makita presented earlier. But for the current fiscal year, we do expect that the returns will be lower than what we see. But certainly we will monitor it very closely and come back to the board if we need to lower the spending because of, if there's a crisis. So for the spending from the prior year was 4%. And for this year, we're certainly, as the resolution indicate, you have to look at all of these different factors in conjunction, but we are also recommending to keep the spending at 4%. Given the need of our students, inflation is a double-edged sword. It actually disproportionately impacts the students and the families that least could afford it because, certainly basic everyday needs are higher now. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. I'm going to move the resolution first before we have discussion. So with that, I'd like to move this item. Do I have a second?
Ferrer seconds.
Okay. Now discussion on the item, and I'm going to start first just a quick statement on this and realize that the market, we're looking at a very unstable market. And probably, given the presentation, we have, a good possibility of clearly underperforming the last few years. And not hitting the original projections. At the same point, I would say that the one thing that the presentation we just saw indicates and points out is that 60% of what we are spending goes directly into students and more than anything, into tuition and affordability. And I would say that this year, given inflation and given the financial ups and downs, we should not retreat from our support of our students. So with that, questions, comments, discussion on the item. Professor Verzani.
Given that most schools don't reach the cap that we're putting on, it suggests that if the cap were higher, it wouldn't be an issue for most campuses. My question is, there are several campuses that don't have their money in the investment pool, and I'm wondering if the cap on the rate inhibits their movement of funds into the investment pool. And if so, then that might be cause for having an increased rate as opposed to 4%.
So for all the foundations who invest in the investment pool, their boards are allowed to determine their spending rate. So that's kind of the process we've followed, and that's for our investment policy. So really the funds that are, and most times those foundations adopt our spending rate. So this applies for mostly to non-foundation funds. So we've never, and what Tom showed also is that the 4% is pretty consistent what we see, other college universities around the country spending. So we feel like that's a pretty steady amount, consistent, and also in line with best practices that we see.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Anyone else? All right. With no other discussion on this, we'll now vote. So please only respond if you'd like to abstain or oppose. That item is approved. With no more other items on the agenda, I move to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a second?
Ferrer seconds.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed or abstention? Thank you all, we're adjourned.